My dad made the toast at my cousin's promotion party. And I still remember exactly where I was standing when he said it. I was near the buffet table, holding a plate I hadn't touched yet, the kind of spread you only see at family parties in a rented hall. Those little phyllo pastry things, the cheese cubes on toothpicks, the veggie tray nobody touches. My cousin Felix had just been named regional director at his firm. He was 31. My dad had been talking about it for weeks before the party even happened. Felix this, Felix that. So when my dad grabbed the microphone, and yes, there was a microphone, my uncle rented the whole thing out, DJ booths and all. I didn't think much of it. I figured he'd say something nice, toast the family, congratulate my uncle and aunt. That's what you do. He started fine. He talked about how proud the family was. How Felix was the kind of man you pointed to and said, That one right there is going places." Everyone was nodding. My aunt had her hand over her heart, and then my dad looked across the room and found me. He said, "And then there's my Ivy." He laughed a little like he was setting up a joke. Felix at 31 is a regional director. Ivy at 29 is still figuring it out. More laughter. Not everyone. Maybe a third of the room. But enough. He kept going. He said something about how he kept hoping I'd find my footing. How he'd given up trying to understand what I did for work. He called my job. I was a freelance grant writer for nonprofits at the time. He called it hobby stuff. He actually said that. Hobby stuff. Into the microphone. In front of 64 people, including my coworker who had come as my +1 because we were carpooling. I stood there, with that plate in my hands, and I did not move. I think part of me was waiting for him to pivot, to say, "But I'm proud of her anyway," or, "She's always been her own person." Something. Anything. The kind of save that makes everyone laugh and forget the part that stung. It didn't come. He raised his glass to Felix and sat down. My coworker. Her name is Lena. She'd known me for 8 months. She turned to me and said, very quietly, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Because what else do you say? I put my plate down. I went to the bathroom. I sat on the closed toilet lid in a single-stall washroom with a wicker basket of decorative soaps on the back of the tank. And I pressed both hands flat on my thighs and breathed. I was not crying. I want to be clear about that. I was past crying. What I felt was something older and quieter than tears. Like something that had been building since I was about 14, had just been handed a microphone and confirmed in front of everyone I knew. I'd always been the one who didn't fit the mold my dad had in his head. My older brother. I'll call him by what everyone calls him, which is just my brother, because that's all he ever was in this story. He was the one my dad understood. Engineering degree from Queens. Stable job with a pension. Married at 26, house in Oakville at 28. My dad could explain my brother to people at parties in one sentence. Everyone nodded. Everyone approved. Me, my dad had been trying to explain for years and kept getting it wrong. I studied English literature at U of T. I did a second degree in public policy. I spent 2 years working at a tiny nonprofit in Halifax that helped resettlement services for newcomers. I moved back to Toronto and started freelancing because I could make more money doing it on my own than on a staff salary, and also because I needed flexibility while I was dealing with some health stuff I wasn't advertising. None of that translated into anything my dad could say at a party, so he'd stopped trying to explain me. And somewhere along the way, he'd started using me as the contrast. The foil. Felix's promotion was an opportunity, and he took it. After the bathroom, I went back out. I found my coworker. I told her I had a headache. We left 40 minutes early. In the car, she didn't push me to talk about it, which I appreciated more than she probably knew. When I got home, I sat with my phone for a long time. My dad texted around 11 that night. It said, "Great party tonight." Felix looked happy. That was it. No mention of the toast. No. I hope I didn't embarrass you. Just Felix looked happy. I put my phone face down on my nightstand, and I lay there in the dark, and I made a decision. Not a dramatic decision. Not something I announced or posted about or told anyone at the time. Just a quiet, settled thing that clicked into place somewhere behind my sternum. I was done being the punchline. I didn't call my dad the next day. Or the day after. He called me once, about 2 weeks later, to ask if I was coming to my aunt and uncle's anniversary dinner. I said I had a prior commitment. He said okay. That was the whole conversation. I didn't go to the anniversary dinner. I didn't go to Christmas that year either. I told my mother, who was a separate and complicated story, that I was spending it with friends. Which was true. My friend, Zoe, hosted a big dinner for everyone who didn't want to do family that year. There were 7 of us around her table, and we ate tourtière and played card games until 2 in the morning. And it was genuinely one of the better Christmases I'd had. My dad emailed in January. The subject line was checking in. The email asked if I was going through something. He said he felt like I'd been distant. He said he hoped things were okay with work. I read it 3 times. I didn't respond. One daughter is going through if he needed a label for it. Was that I had decided to stop arranging myself around his approval. That's not a thing you can explain in an email reply. Or at least I couldn't. Those years, and I say years because that's what it became, were not empty. I want to push back on the idea that going quiet on your family means going quiet on your life. It doesn't. In that first year, I landed 2 contracts that together paid me more than I'd made in any previous full year of work. One was with a mid-sized environmental nonprofit based in Vancouver that needed someone to write federal funding proposals. I was good at it. I got them a grant on the first submission cycle, which apparently almost never happens. I also started running, which sounds small, but wasn't. I'd had a chronic pain condition that I'd been managing badly for years. Partly because I was stressed all the time, and partly because I kept putting my own health at the bottom of the list. When I stopped spending emotional energy on a relationship that only ever made me feel like a footnote, I had more left over for myself. I started seeing a physiotherapist. I started sleeping properly. I ran my first 5K in the spring, and I cried at the finish line, not because it was impressive, but because 6 months earlier I hadn't believed I could do it. I moved into a bigger apartment. I adopted a cat, which my landlord technically wasn't thrilled about, but we worked it out. I kept in loose contact with my mother. She and my dad had been separated for years and had their own dynamic. I wasn't interested in being pulled into. She knew I wasn't talking to my dad. She didn't ask me to fix it. That was probably the most generous thing she could have done. My brother knew too. He texted me once, about a year in, to say he understood why I was doing what I was doing. He didn't agree with it, or at least he thought family was family and you worked through things. But he said he understood. I appreciated that. It wasn't nothing. 3 years in, I gave a presentation at a funding conference in Ottawa. One of the directors of a National Arts Council came up to me afterward and asked for my card. That led to a contract that was the biggest of my career. I stayed in Ottawa for a few extra days and walked along the Rideau Canal and ate beaver tails in the cold and felt something I can only describe as solid. Like my feet were planted somewhere real. My coworker Lena, who had been at the party that night, had become one of my closest friends by then. We got coffee every couple of weeks, and one time she brought up the toast, because she'd never forgotten it either. She said she remembered standing there trying to decide if she should say something to my dad. I asked her what stopped her. She said she looked at my face and realized I didn't want a scene. She was right. Then, 4 years and 3 months after the party, I remember it was early spring because there was still snow on the ground in Toronto. But it was the kind of day where you could almost feel the season deciding to change. My phone rang. It was my brother's number. But when I picked up, it wasn't my brother. It was my dad. He said, "Ivy, it's Dad. I'm calling from your brother's phone, mine died." A pause. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" I was in my kitchen making tea. I set the mug down. He said he needed to tell me something about Felix. Felix? The regional director, the one who made it. The one who was 31 and already somewhere. Had been let go from his firm 8 months earlier. That part, I hadn't known. What I also hadn't known was that Felix had taken out a significant personal loan to cover his family's expenses while he looked for work. The loan was from my dad, $45,000. And Felix's situation had not improved. He'd been offered a position in the States, but it required the licensing and retraining and more time. The money was not coming back. My dad didn't tell me this to ask for money. I want to be clear about that. I think he told me because he finally had to say it to someone who wasn't already inside the situation, and I was the only one left who was far enough outside it to hear it cleanly. He talked for a long time. About how he'd thought Felix had everything figured out. About how it turned out having everything figured out at 31 sometimes means unraveling at 34. About how he'd been trying so hard to understand what success looked like that maybe he'd gotten confused about what he was actually looking for. And then he said, quietly, "I owe you an apology." I was still standing in my kitchen. The kettle had finished and I hadn't poured it. He said, "That toast. At the party. That was cruel, and I've known it was cruel for 4 years, and I should have called you the next morning." I didn't say anything for a moment. He said, "I was jealous, I think. Of the way you didn't need my approval. Your brother needed it. Felix needed it. You never did. Not really. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I made it into a flaw." I poured my tea, just to have something to do with my hands. I told him I appreciated him saying it. I told him I wasn't in a place where I could promise what came next. Because I wasn't. 4 years is a long time, and I had built something in that time that I wasn't going to dismantle for the comfort of pretending nothing happened. He said he understood. I said I'd think about it. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing in particular. He asked about my work, and I told him a little. He asked about the cat. I told him about the cat. It was strange and a bit stilted. And also, in some way I wasn't expecting, not unbearable. When I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I didn't call him back the next week. Or the week after. But I texted him in early May, a short one, just asking if he wanted to get coffee sometime. He replied within 3 minutes. He said yes. We met at a diner near his apartment in Scarborough. We sat in a booth by the window and we both ordered just coffee and we talked for 2 hours. It was uncomfortable in patches. There were things I said that I had needed to say for years. There were things he said that surprised me. He talked about his own father, my grandfather, who I'd never met, and some of what he described sounded familiar in ways I hadn't been expecting. I'm not going to tell you it was a clean reconciliation. It wasn't. There was no moment where everything clicked back into place. There was just 2 people sitting in a diner trying to be honest with each other. Which is harder than it sounds and more than I'd thought I was going to get. What I'll say is this. The night of that party, when my dad took the microphone and held it up to the thing he thought about me, I felt something crack open. And for a long time I thought that crack was damage. Something that needed to be plastered over or mourned. It wasn't. That crack was the beginning of everything I built in those 4 years. The contracts, the running, the apartment, the cat, the Ottawa trip. The friends who showed up at the table when I needed them. None of that happened while I was standing in a banquet hall waiting for my dad to think better of me. All of it happened after I put down the plate and walked out. My dad never understood what I did for work. I'm not sure he fully understands it now, but a few months after that diner meeting, he mentioned to someone at a family thing I heard it secondhand from my brother. That I was really good at what I do. He didn't need to be specific. He didn't need to explain it. He just said I was really good at it, which is all I ever wanted him to say. I've thought a lot about what my dad actually did that night at Felix's party. Not the words. I have those memorized, I don't need to think about them, but the mechanics of it. What he believed he was doing when he picked up that microphone and pointed it at me. I think he thought he was telling the truth. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. He wasn't being cruel for cruelty's sake. He genuinely believed that what he saw in me was a deficiency, that the way I'd built my life, quietly, on my own terms, without a title anyone could repeat at a party, was evidence of failure. And so he said it, into the microphone, in front of everyone. What he didn't account for was what happens when you say that to someone who is already, slowly, in the process of deciding she doesn't need your definition of success. He pushed me out the door before I was ready to leave. And everything I built after that, the contracts, the running, the apartment, the friends who showed up when I needed them, all of it grew in the space that opened up once I stopped standing in that banquet hall waiting for him to change his mind about me. That's the part nobody tells you about setting a boundary with someone who's hurt you. It's not about punishing them. It's not even really about them at all. It's about what you find when you finally stop orienting your whole life around their judgment. I stopped waiting for my dad's approval and I accidentally discovered what I was actually capable of. Those two things are not unrelated. And then Felix, the one he'd held up as the standard, came undone. Not because he was bad or weak, but because life doesn't hold still for anyone, and the version of success my dad had built in his head was more fragile than either of them realized. $45,000, and a lot of quiet months later, my dad finally had to call someone who was standing far enough outside the story to hear it clearly. He called me. I don't think the universe arranged it that way as a lesson. I think it just happened, the way things do. And what mattered was what each of us chose to do with it. My dad chose to apologize. I chose to listen. Neither of those things came easily. Both of them required something. What I keep coming back to is this. The version of me who stood in that bathroom with her hands flat on her thighs, breathing, not crying. That person made a choice. Not a loud one. Not one anyone applauded. She just decided that the way her father saw her was not the final word on who she was. That decision is what built everything else. Not talent, not luck, not the right contacts or the right timing. Though all of those helped. The foundation was just that one quiet, unglamorous choice to stop letting someone else's small idea of you become the ceiling you lived under. I sat across from my dad in that Scarborough diner and I watched him try to find the words, and I thought, this is what it looks like when a person is finally honest about something that cost them. It's not elegant. It doesn't come with an apology that covers everything. It's just two people in a booth by the window, doing their best with what they have left. That was enough for me to start with. Not because I owe forgiveness on anyone's timeline, but because I'd done the hard part already, on my own, without anyone watching. The diner was just the part that came after.